who went off on Brett Ratner, the director, about the Epstein files, and he's all over them. That's just blatantly false. That's an absolute lie.
Just to be clear, she was talking about the allegations about Brett Ratner were actually not related to the Epstein files that caused him to be,
I know she mentioned
his
something
fall
about
from
it.
grace,
She said the
so to
term
speak,
he was
in
all
Hollywood.
over the Epstein files, and he's not. There's a picture of him and his fiancée with Jeffrey Epstein.
But there are other allegations against Brett Ratner
that have nothing to do with
the Epstein files. That's also what.
But I mean, the bottom line is, I don't know how Todd Blanche covered up for Donald Trump regarding the Epstein files.
In this video, Abby Phillips brings her show to a halt and directly challenges Arthur Aidala after he makes what she describes as a misleading claim on Newsnight with Abby Phillip. That is exactly why this conversation matters. The bigger issue extends far beyond any single person. It is about whether the law is being enforced fairly and equally for everyone, or whether political loyalty is starting to carry more weight than justice itself. With that in mind, let's dive in and take a look at how Abby Phillips pushes back against Arthur Aidala on Newsnight with Abby Phillip.
You know, Arthur, that's quite the view of the DOJ. I mean, I think about all the various things that the DOJ is responsible for prosecuting. And it seems like Todd Blanche seems to think that the most important thing is finding attorneys anywhere in the nation who want to go after President Trump's perceived enemies.
Well, I don't know. I'm not sure that was my takeaway from that. Look.
What was your takeaway from it?
Well, let me just give you a little my basis of speaking here. I work in the community where Todd was a U.S. attorney in the Southern District. I didn't know him personally then. I did have an encounter with him when he was representing the president in the courthouse. But he does enjoy amongst his colleagues an excellent reputation for his integrity, his knowledge of the law, and knowing, look, if you could look at the Trump administration, there are a lot of people who are in positions, and we may talk about one of them today, that really have no reason to be there. Todd does know the law. I mean, he knows the federal law, and he was in the Southern District, and that's where he was trained. I think a lot of people in the legal community who have to deal with not the stories you cover, but the day in and day out cases that I deal with on a regular, but not the headline cases. No. They're happy to have Todd Blanche there because he's level-headed, he's reasonable, and he was the DAG. The Deputy Attorney General really runs the office. Now, when people say about the Epstein files, he was covering up for Trump. No one is. There's so much misconception. You had Ana Navarro on here who went off on Brett Ratner, the director, about the Epstein files, and he's all over them. That's just blatantly false. That's an absolute lie.
Just to be clear, she was talking about the allegations about Brett Ratner were actually not related to the Epstein files that caused him to be,
I know she mentioned
his
something
fall
about
from
it.
grace,
She said the term he was all over the Epstein files, and he's not. There's a picture of him and his fiancée with Jeffrey Epstein.
But there are other allegations against Brett Ratner
that have nothing to do with
the Epstein files. That's also what.
But I mean, the bottom line is, I don't know how Todd Blanche covered up for Donald Trump regarding the Epstein files. There may be ways that the Epstein files came out that people aren't happy with, but I don't think that's one of them.
I can tell you how he covered up for him. Todd Blanche went down to Florida and met with Ghislaine Maxwell.
My client. Met
with her in prison, and then mysteriously she ends up in a lower security prison in Texas.
But you said at the time, Arthur, that you thought that was basically a quid pro quo.
Let me just be very clear. I don't know that for a fact. I want to make that blatantly clear. I've spoken to Ghislaine not that long ago. First of all, people get moved within the system all the time. They just moved Keith Raniere, who's doing 120 years to a less restrictive.
But you basically said, I mean, let's. I believe you. I believe you when you say maybe you don't know firsthand exactly what transpired in that conversation. But you basically said that no one would avail their client in a situation like that unless they were getting something out of it, and that the move from a high security prison to a low security prison would be. I'll use your words.
And that is really the core of the debate here. The Justice Department is not meant to operate as a president's personal legal shield or private defense team. Its reputation and credibility rely on the public believing that the same laws and standards apply to everyone, whether that person is a former president, a close political ally, or an everyday American citizen. That is where the perception problem starts to become a major issue. When high-ranking DOJ officials are involved in sensitive situations that appear tied to a president's personal interests, people are naturally going to raise questions. Even if nothing improper actually happened, public confidence can still take a hit when there is not enough openness or transparency surrounding the process. The Maxwell case is a clear example of that reality. Transfers within the federal prison system happen regularly, but because this case has attracted so much public attention, every decision and every new development is examined under a microscope. That is why the Justice Department has traditionally worked hard to avoid not only real conflicts of interest, but even situations that could create the appearance of one. Public trust is not built solely on what takes place behind closed doors. It also depends on whether people believe the process was fair, impartial, and free from political influence. What Keith and Abby are highlighting reflects a much larger concern that has been building for years. Americans have watched both Republicans and Democrats accuse the DOJ of being weaponized whenever investigations fail to produce the outcomes they were hoping for. Several public polls have shown that confidence in major institutions, including the justice system, has declined sharply over the last decade. That loss of trust did not happen overnight. And if we're going to apply the same standard across the board, it's fair to say that if a Democratic administration had DOJ officials meeting with individuals connected to a politically explosive case, while questions surrounded the president's interests, conservatives would likely be demanding answers every single day. The standard should not change depending on which party is in power. The bigger concern is what happens in the long run. Once people begin to believe that justice is shaped by political relationships and personal connections, earning back that trust becomes incredibly difficult.
A common sense outcome.
Let me just make it clear. I did not represent Ghislaine on the conversations with Todd. We did her appeal. But yes, I'm not going to bring any client in to see any prosecutor unless I know there's some benefit for my client.
Is that ethical?
Of course it's the way the system works.
No.
Tell me, what do you mean it's not ethical? It's the way it works every day.
Is that ethical in the context of the crimes that she was convicted of?
And that's what I was going to say.
That's the real question.
Moving from one prison for 20 years to another prison for 20 years.
To a low security prison that she is actually not supposed to be in.
Well, let me just say this.
Yeah.
Todd Blanche probably does know the law really well, but his application of the law is, I think, what is in question right now. And we all know there are different types of lawyers out here, just like there are different types of salespeople out there. Some sell snake oil and some sell actually real goods that are going to be help.
Like coconut oil.
Coconut oil. Right?
Coconut.
We were talking about.
Coconut oil.
Very funny, aren't there? But I think a couple of things. One, Pam Bondi making this omission or this basically confession that Todd Blanche was over the Epstein files. One, clearly a woman scorned. She's pissed, right? And so she's like, I'm letting everybody know where the body's buried. And actually, I believe that because if you've ever worked with the DOJ in an administration, you do know the AG and the DAG actually do have separate portfolios. And while they do confer, a lot of times they move policy separately. So the strong likelihood that the DAG probably actually, meaning the Deputy Attorney General, Todd Blanche, actually was leading on the Epstein files and covered up, which makes, though, the point about his character as the Attorney General even more questionable. And this is now transcended party. You have people who are in MAGA, you have people who are Democrats, you have independents who are really concerned at the handling, not just at the Trump administration, but many of his administrations handling of the Epstein files. But because Trump ran on this as being so transparent, and there is now a law that is passed about transparency and they still aren't being completely transparent, it raises questions. On top of Todd Blanche in every act while he was acting, doing as many things possible to accommodate Donald Trump's promises of retribution, especially with the backdrop of Pam Bondi getting fired because Donald Trump didn't think she did it well enough. So when that fact pattern happens,
that part is going to be a problem for him on Capitol Hill. John Cornyn says being Attorney General is probably one of the hardest jobs in the cabinet because you're working for the president, but you're also supposed to be able to tell the president no.
Yes.
As the lead lawyer for the country, I'm going to let the process work. And Tom Tillis also says he probably wants to see something on the actual dissolution of the slush fund before he would consider it. So, yeah, Todd Blanche is probably going to have to answer. Is he willing to tell President Trump no, or does he just think that President Trump is still his client like he was in the private sector?
The Justice Department has always depended heavily on public confidence to maintain its credibility. Attorneys general from both Republican and Democratic administrations have consistently argued that the DOJ earns the public's trust by remaining independent enough to tell a president no when the circumstances demand it. That is why there has traditionally been such a strong effort to keep a clear line between the White House and ongoing criminal investigations. The Epstein controversy demonstrates exactly why transparency matters so much. For years, politicians, media personalities, and even many of Trump's own supporters have called for more information related to Epstein to be released publicly. When an administration runs on promises of transparency and accountability, but then struggles to provide clear and consistent explanations, skepticism is almost inevitable. That reaction is not necessarily partisan. It is simply how people respond when important questions remain unanswered. And from a political standpoint, this concern is no longer coming only from Democrats. Conservatives, libertarians, MAGA supporters, and independent voters have all raised similar questions. If everything was handled appropriately, why does it appear so difficult for anyone to receive a straightforward answer? The larger issue centers on the perception of favoritism, because in government, perception often carries nearly as much weight as reality itself. Ethics experts have long argued that public officials should avoid not only actual conflicts of interest, but also situations that create the appearance of one. Once people begin to believe that powerful individuals are being treated differently than everyone else, trust in public institutions starts to erode. That is also one reason the debate surrounding the so-called slush fund continues to face criticism. Even some Republican senators have publicly expressed concerns about oversight, transparency, and constitutional authority. When criticism begins coming from members of your own party, it is often a sign that the issue extends beyond routine political disagreements. And if we are applying the same standard across the board, it is fair to say that if a Democratic administration had a deputy attorney general playing a significant role in controversial investigations, high-profile prison discussions, and politically sensitive settlements connected to the president's interests, conservatives would almost certainly be demanding hearings around the clock. The standard should remain consistent regardless of which political party happens to be in power.
Well, I think there's a couple of things going on here. One, I think Pam Bondi has absolutely laid the groundwork for Todd Blanche to have a difficult confirmation. And I think she used her time in that closed-door session where she was sworn under oath in front of Congress as the former Attorney General and as Todd Blanche's former boss to say he ran the whole process and he was in charge of the whole release and the Dow's at 50,000. Right? And so she's now laid the groundwork for that to be a confirmation where Democrats can essentially have a layup and say, there's no way I could vote for this guy. I can't. This is about women. This is about protecting. Because like you said, other people have noticed this has been a politically toxic issue for the president. I'm sure there's a lot we're going to disagree on. But on the topic of the slush fund and answering to the president, I think we should agree on the facts. And what the facts are is that the creation of this fund, it's not a slush fund, it's an anti-weaponization fund. Why do we have the fund? Okay. Why do we have the fund?
Because Donald Trump wants it.
Because Charles Littlejohn.
To reward the rioters,
let's go through some yes or no questions. IRS contractor Charles Littlejohn pled guilty to leaking President Trump's tax returns. Yes or no?
Yes.
Before we go,
he
and
also pled
400,000
guilty.
other Americans.
He also pled guilty. So we know. Then we also have 400,000
get $1 billion?
What does that have to do? What does that have to do with a $1.8 billion fund that Trump explicitly said this week was to compensate January 6th rioters who he pardoned?
I think because there are a number of people who have felt the full weight of the weaponization of the government.
He said this week when he was asked about the fund, he said, I'm proud I pardoned these people, and they deserve money from the government.
Yeah,
that's
because
what
we
he
had
wants the fund
grandmas
to
who
be
were in
about.
jail for 2 years. We had people who did not commit violent crimes while we watched people do
there are
BLM
many
riots
people who did
in Minnesota and watched
violent
Democrats put
crimes.
up links saying donate
There
to religions
are
in
many
jail.
people who did commit violent crimes, and the president himself has said that he wants them to be compensated.
This is a joke.
I'm not just talking about.
I'm really embarrassed for you that you have to defend this, because even Republican senators on the Hill are saying that this is ridiculous. And Donald Trump isn't doing himself any favors by pushing this.
Did the Justice Department have to apologize to Donald Trump? Yes or no?
You know what? I let you speak
No.
the whole
Yes
time.
or no?
I let you
No.
speak. I didn't
Yes.
interrupt you. Okay? So, thank you. Donald Trump is even in trouble now because we've got Tom Tillis, you've got Cassidy, you've got Cornyn, all these people who are raising questions about Trump's decision-making here. And I think the big problem is there used to be this principle in the Justice Department called avoiding the appearance of impropriety.
For decades, the Justice Department operated with an understanding that avoiding even the appearance of impropriety was almost as important as avoiding actual misconduct. That is why attorneys general from both Republican and Democratic administrations frequently recused themselves from sensitive matters or created additional layers of separation between political leadership and criminal investigations. The goal was not simply to ensure fairness behind the scenes, it was also to make sure the public believed the process itself was fair and free from political influence. The concern surrounding this proposed fund is that it immediately prompts questions about who is eligible for compensation and what standards are being used to determine that eligibility. Even if there are individuals who were genuinely wronged by the government, the United States already has established legal mechanisms for addressing those situations through wrongful prosecution claims, civil rights lawsuits, settlements, and court decisions. Creating a separate fund with strong political ties outside of those traditional channels is what makes many people uncomfortable. Politically, this has become a difficult issue for Republicans as well. When members of your own party begin raising concerns publicly, it is often a sign that the matter extends beyond routine partisan criticism. Many Republican lawmakers spent years advocating for government accountability, fiscal discipline, and limits on executive power. A multi-billion-dollar fund managed largely by political appointees naturally raises questions about whether those principles are being applied consistently. There is also a broader discussion about fairness and equal standards. Conservatives have often spoken out against government overreach when it affects people they support, and that is a valid concern. However, the same standard should be applied in every situation. If accountability is truly the objective, then transparency about how taxpayer dollars are being spent and who ultimately benefits from them must be part of that conversation as well. The Justice Department's reputation has already faced serious challenges over the past several years. Public confidence in major institutions has declined significantly, and controversies like this only add to the growing sense of skepticism. Once people begin to feel that justice is being shaped by political relationships instead of facts, evidence, and equal treatment under the law, restoring that trust becomes incredibly difficult. At the end of the day, the strongest institutions are not just the ones that follow the law. They are also the ones that avoid situations that cause Americans to question whether that law is being enforced fairly, equally, and consistently. That is the standard the Justice Department should continue striving to uphold, regardless of who happens to be sitting in the White House. I'm A. Carter on Culture. Don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel.